All right, folks, thank you for coming back in. We want to start the afternoon session now. And the first session this afternoon will be dealing with open data. And we have the moderator for this first session is Mr. Bevel Wooding, who is a man of many hats. For this particular event, however, he is an advisor to the CTU, and he will take us through this, this session on open data. Bevel is an internet strategist and is associated with the Congress WBN, as well as Packet Clearinghouse, in addition to his frequent role as advisor and collaborator with the CTU. So I'll invite Bevel now to take us through this session on open data.
Thank you, Nigel. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. This is actually one of those sessions where we're going to be getting into some of the practicalities of building out the single ICT space. One of the most important components is the issue of open data. It's a term I'm sure many of you have heard before, but most people are more familiar with the product of open data. If you've ever used a GPS navigation app like Waze or Google Maps, you are, in fact, using something that is built on top of publicly accessible open data. If you use flight tracker applications to see when your flight is supposed to arrive or supposed to depart, you're also using something that's built on top of publicly accessible data. And that's on the service and application end. What we want to look at in terms of the applicability of open data in a Caribbean context is how does this fit into the single ICT space? How do we go beyond the promise of open data? And in terms of that promise, the economists once likened open data to a new gold mine. So in both developing countries and developed countries, people are talking about the promise of open data, the benefits of open data, the possibilities that can be created with open data. It can help generate jobs, transform industries, yield economic returns, increase government transparency, strengthen data-informed policy and decision-making. And these are all true things, and they're really part of the potential that open data represents. But inside of that, there's a reality. And so in this session, we want to look at both the promise, the reality, and the practical steps that have to be taken. Part of that reality is that transparency is not always desired. Part of that reality is that not everyone is fully aware of or convinced of the economic or social benefits of making data open for use by anyone for any purpose. Part of the reality is that there are very little success stories in our context that allow us to say this is how it can work in the Caribbean, or this is how it can work in small island developing nations. Part of the reality is we have a culture that is very much tuned by an appetite that are very much informed by give me it now. And that creates a frustration between the pace with which government is innovating and the pace with which people, the public, citizens, expect to have access to services. So in that context, these real-world realities can be summed up like this. The lack of familiarity with the model of open data. And for each one of these realities, we want to look at the potential of the region to overcome them. Lack of familiarity with the model. Resource-intensive digitization process. If you want open data, you're presuming your data is digital. What happens when most of your data still lives in files and folders and vaults and cardboard boxes under leaking air-conditioned units, as I've seen in some National Archive centers in the Caribbean? What happens in that context? How, even with your best intentions to be open, do you get it digitized before you can get it open data for open services? What are some of the perceived challenges to ownership and control and monetization? This list is part of the reality of dealing with moving toward a more open use of Caribbean data. And remember, in this session, we're looking at open data in the context of movement toward a single ICT space. We heard this morning in the keynote address things like how do you get skill certificate information to move between one country and another, driver's license and immigration data. What happens in that context when issues of ownership, control, circulate around the benefit of convenience and ease of use? Of course, there's also the reality of the research and the measurements and the academic overlay to open data so that the benefits can be quantified and qualified. And then the other and final one that I want to list here as we get into this session is the mass of interested developers. And I think it was Devindra's presentation where he mentioned this issue of local content. Open data is like the feedstock for local applications and local services. But to make that transition, you need developers actually building out on these data sets and translating the raw data into value-added services. Who are those developers? Where do they exist? Are they actually interested in writing e-government applications and new services? Right? So this list, the real-world realities, is part of the list of items that have to be addressed or confronted when any region, any territory of any size in any part of the world is addressing the issue of open data. And for us here this afternoon, we have someone from the World Bank, Annette Lewin, and she's going to be talking about open data in the Caribbean single ICT space. And she's an ICT policy specialist in the World Bank Transport and ICT Global Practice. And as Selby said in his sessions, well suited to speak on this topic. She manages lending and technical assistance projects in the areas of e-government, ICT policy, open data, ICT applications, IT entrepreneurship and innovation, and cybersecurity. But specifically in the area of open data, she leads the diagnostic and implementation activities to assist governments in opening non-sensitive data sets so that businesses can create economic value with data-enhanced products and services, and all of the other benefits that we have discussed. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce you the speaker for this session on open data, Ms. Annette Lewin. Please welcome her.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Bevel. And thank you very much to my partners from the CTU for inviting me to speak here today and to be able to address all of you. My presentation today will be on open data in the single ICT space. This will be what I would like to touch upon today. I have a lot of information to give you, so I'll be speaking fast, going through some of these things to give you a taste of all of the information that's available, and if anybody has any questions, they can follow up with me also afterwards. Open data is not new. Actually, in the 1980s, the very first episode of Yes, Minister dealt with open data. There was a scandal, and then the concept of open government and open data was buried. So fast forward to 2015, and about 46 countries have open data initiatives in the world. As you can see, we don't have much activity on an open data initiative in the Caribbean region at this stage, but that's changing because we've started to do work in St. Lucia, we've started to do work in Jamaica, there's work being done also in Trinidad and Tobago. And we're hoping very much to fill in that map as we go along in the future. I'll start with some definitions and a discussion about the economic benefits. I hope also that you're able to see the presentation online. The PowerPoint has been posted onto the CTU website. Under events, you'll be able to see it there, and it might be a bit clearer than here. So The degree of access is one of the first variables when it comes to the definition of open data. When everybody has access to the data, that's considered open data. If it has just access by subscription or through membership, or if only a certain subset like government has access to the data, that's not considered open data. Machine readability is probably the most important element of open data. So if governments are currently posting their data in a PDF file online, is that open data? Trick question. I see some no's, and that is correct. PDF files are very difficult for machines to read. If they do so erroneously. You often need a human to fix the mistakes. So what a lot of governments are doing is posting their data in PDF online, and that's good because they're being transparent, but it's not machine readable. So we would like to see formats that a computer can identify. If given the access on the address on the internet, the computer can find the data, it can locate it, it can read it, it can do something with it. So formats that are not easily processed by computers are not considered open data. Cost. Open data is free. It's free of charge. So if currently you have to pay for data, if you have to pay a subscription fee, that's not considered open data. This poses a question for governments in terms of cost recovery mechanisms for some data sets. So we find in a lot of governments that particularly corporate registry, business registry data is being sold. And there are other data sets that governments are selling because they'd like to recover the cost of compiling the data. What we'd like to recommend is that the data itself be made available free of charge, but where the government has to enter into additional work in order to prepare the data for that specific user. So let's say you decided you want the data in a CD-ROM, or you need to buy the hard copy of the book. That should be charged. But the raw data, the statistics, just the figures, they can be thrown up in a CSV file on the internet, and that shouldn't cost the government any more money. And so they shouldn't pass on any charges to you because they can share that information with you for free. And lastly, another really big important item about open data is the licensing regime. Open data has unlimited rights to use and offers unlimited rights to others to use and reuse them. So that means that citizens and businesses can take the data and they can use the data for commercial purposes, and that's okay. So wherever a government website says copyright, all rights protected, that's not open data. But when a government website says our data are available for anybody to use for commercial purposes only, but there are some issues here. If you use the data for your product or service, that doesn't mean that the government endorses that product or service. So the government can protect itself. It can say anyone who uses the data, that doesn't mean that the government is liable for any risks that are associated with the use of the data. The government can also say that if you use the open data, you need to link back to the definitive version of the data set on the government website. And it could say that you're not allowed to change the data in any way, or it could say, if you decide to change the data, you have to document exactly how you change the data. So an open license for government data doesn't mean that the government is unprotected. The government can define how it protects itself with that open license, but it can say if these criteria, those parameters are met, such as no risk taken by government, no liability, you must link back to the original definitive data that's on the website, then you can use the data other than that for however you like. So that is the main definition of open data. What are the benefits? And Bevel touched on these as well. Economic value is one of the main benefits that we at the World Bank like to focus on. When you make this treasure trove of data that government has available, you will find that businesses will use that data and they will create new products and services, and they will create new businesses, and those businesses will hire people, and they can be taxed. So there's a creation of economic value once that data is published, and I'll give you examples of that as we go along. Transparency and accountability, of course, are also part of open data. When these government data sets are made available online, people can have a look at them, civil society can analyze them, the media can analyze them, and they can write stories about the data sets, and that ultimately feeds back into policy. Data exchange across government. You'd be surprised that or maybe not so surprised for some of you, is how difficult it is sometimes to get data from another ministry within your own government. So what we found in some of our diagnostics is that the PS needs to write a letter to the other PS, and then ultimately the data will come through. But let's say Ministry of Tourism is requesting information from Ministry of Agriculture, hypothetically. Somebody at Agriculture will PDF the Excel file, email it over to Tourism, and someone in Tourism will go ahead and manually re-enter the data. It happens all the time. So we hear of this happening all the time. And how much better would it be if the raw machine-readable data would be made available on an open data portal and people could just go and take it? So in fact, the government of British Columbia in Canada found that when it analyzed the users of its open data portal, it found that a third of the downloads of data from the British Columbia Open Data Portal came from domain names from within the government of British Columbia. So it was its own largest client. And that does happen as well. Data-informed policymaking. When these data sets are made available and people analyze them, and this feeds back to policymakers, the decisions that can be made based on that data are better, in short. And so I have a couple of examples for this as well. One last bit of information on sort of what open data is or isn't. There's a 5-star set of definitions of open data formats. And right now, most of the data in the Caribbean is not at the 1 star. But it's very easy to get to 3 stars. What's more difficult is to get to 4 or 5 stars, and I wouldn't even say that we have to, really focus on 4 and 5 stars right now. Let's focus on 3 stars. The first star is make your data available on the web in whatever format with an open license. So right now, a lot of governments don't have that open license. It's very easy to adopt an open license. There is a license that we recommend as part of our work. It's called Creative Commons 4.0. It's been part of the open data readiness assessments that we've done for St. Lucia, for Jamaica, as well as for Antigua. And I can give any government representatives more information about this. But once that license is adopted, you already have 1 star. You could make the data available as structured data, so that means in Excel instead of PDF, or instead of an image scan of a table. This is also very easy because no PDF file was born a PDF file. It came from somewhere else, and usually if it's data, it came from Excel. So that means that somebody in some office has an Excel file on their computer, and once you take that Excel file, you post it on the website next to the PDF file, you're at 2 stars, as long as you've also done the licensing. So this is also something very easy for governments to do. The 3rd star is if that machine-readable structured data file, rather than being a proprietary format of Excel, would be a non-proprietary format such as CSV. CSV, basically Excel is tabular structured data, which a computer can read. And Excel is the proprietary version of it. CSV is the open source version of it. So that gets you 3 stars. All of these things are very easy to do. 4 stars is when you have addresses to identify data sets so that people can actually point to specific data sets and use that in their coding, in their software development. So be able to do sort of real-time updates and real-time data exchanges for their software and for their applications. And the other one is if you link your data to other people's data and mash it up and enrich the data set, and you can do that in real time as well, and that gets you 5 stars, and that's a good goal to go towards. But as I mentioned, very easy to get to 3 stars, and that's a whole lot of stars already. There are a number of studies that have shown that the potential benefits of open data range from between 0.4% of GDP to 4.1% of GDP. The much-cited McKinsey study shows that in the US, so this is for a rather large US market, within 7 sectors that includes education, transportation, consumer products, electricity, oil and gas, healthcare, and consumer finance, the potential of open data is between $3 trillion to $5 trillion. So this doesn't include agriculture, which is important in the Caribbean, or tourism, but it gives you an idea in a market at the US what this is calculated as, if within those sectors those data sets were made available. I'm often asked what's the difference between freedom to information and open data, and I wanted to let you know that it's kind of the inverse of one another. So freedom to information is when data can be generally closed. They don't have to be. You can have an open data initiative and a freedom to information initiative, and they live together very happily. But in many countries, data is generally closed. And through a FOIA, you request the data or information, and the data may be released. It gets processed. They decide, do they give you the data, yes or no, and then they decide when to give it to you. Inversely, with open data, you define what is the restricted data, what's the sensitive data, and this is defined for the government, and then you say everything else should be opened. So you do it the other way around. You decide what's not to be opened, and that's military data, police data, it's people's personal data. So we're not talking about anyone's police record, we're not talking about anyone's personal health record, or their student examination results. We're not talking about any data that involves somebody's name. So it certainly is not about data that's personal or private. This is more about tourism arrival data. It's about weather data for the last 60 years. In a lot of countries, the weather data that's reported is maybe 1 or 2 points. Depends on how big the country is. If it's a small country, it'll be 1 point. But most countries have several weather reading stations. And they have data ranging back to 40 years from 15 different stations. And if that data set were made available in a machine-readable format, some business is going to do something with that data. And it's just currently not being made available like that. So bear in mind that's sort of the difference between the two. So I wanted to tell you some examples of what open data can do, both abroad and some examples in the Caribbean. One of the big examples in the agriculture sector is 2 guys from Google in 2006 requested open data from the government, and they took terabytes of weather data spanning back 60 years, and they also took terabytes of soil quality data. So the United States Department of Agriculture, their agricultural extension officers collected soil quality data, and they had it at a pretty granular level, pun intended, and they took this data and used big data analytical techniques on the data, and they were able to sell farmers crop insurance because they were able to connect the patterns of when the weather wasn't doing well and what the soil quality, when the soil quality wasn't doing well and the weather wasn't good. They were able to sell that type of insurance to farmers, and farmers could lock in their profits even if there was drought or excessive rain or other type of adverse weather condition. So Monsanto bought this company 8 years later for $1.1 billion. So now you can see why there is a potential here. The input was free data from the government, and the output was a company valued at over $1 billion 8 years later. Of course, you have to have the human resources of being able to do the big data analytic techniques, but that's a skill that can be learned. This is also another example of open data mixed together with big data analytic techniques. In Japan, this is a natural disaster example, which I know this is one of the other issues that Caribbean countries are grappling with, so I'm trying to use examples that are relevant to you. What Japan did is it asked the telecom operators for anonymized, very important, anonymized data of mobile phone, when the mobile phones were checking in with the different cell towers and where it is that people were moving. And it asked for this information right after an earthquake. And then it plotted that information onto this map. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to see what happened in an earthquake, where did people go? And what they found was that at the time of the earthquake, everybody stood still. This is on the website, this is actually an animation. You can see the the people moving. The little lights are all people moving with their mobile phones. So at the earthquake time, everybody stood still. Within a few minutes after the earthquake, you would find different points converging towards one another, and this is families meeting, or people meeting, people who knew each other, friends meeting, and then you would find those points leaving town together on several of, established routes. What did this tell the government now? Where are they going to build their shelters? Where are they going to roll out their earthquake support program next time an earthquake hits? Where are they going to have food, non-perishable food for the next earthquake? These things happen regularly in that area of the world. And where are they going to be able to establish those services? And they knew how many people went where. So this is how open data with big data analytic techniques helps policymakers. Another example is one of the things that we're actually going to bring to the Caribbean. We call it the journalist boot camp, and what we found also as part of the diagnostics that we've done here in Jamaica and in St. Lucia, policymakers tell us our journalists really need help to be able to analyze the data that we publish. They get the data, they report on it, but they're not getting it right. So it would be really great if you could bring this to us, and so we're in discussions with both Jamaica and St. Lucia to bring a journalist boot camp for open data to the Caribbean for those countries as part of our program. So journalists are taught how to read the data and how to report on it. In the case of Kenya, one of the reporters had a question, and the question was, why is it that young girls in rural schools in Kenya start performing badly when they reach adolescence? So that's the question. This is the policy question. What happens? Well, you can use open data to answer that question, because if you talk to Ministry of Education, they'll say, oh, maybe it was malaria or the girls were sick, but that doesn't make sense because malaria doesn't choose a gender. The boys would get malaria as well. Or they would say, oh, it's this or that or the other, and none of it really made sense. So the journalist went and looked at large swaths of data sets that were being made available by the Ministry of Education. And what she found was that where the toilet facilities at the rural schools were not up to scratch, either there were no toilet facilities at all, or they were not hygienic, or they were not good, the girls were dropping out as they reached adolescence. Or the girls performed worse. They wouldn't come to school for some of the time as they reached adolescence. So there's a very clear policy implication here. If you want the girls to succeed, if you want for them to do well, build sanitary toilet facilities. Nobody would have thought of this. But this is what happened in Kenya, and it was found out through one of the journalists. This is an example of school performance data in Tanzania. When you publish open data, others will take the data sets and they will look at it and say, well, around me, which school is the best school? Where should I send my child? So you see here that you can look at teacher to pupil ratio. You can mash it up with a map. You can say, I'm here. What are the best performing schools around me? Where should I send my kid? Hospital performance data in the US. So school performance and hospital performance data are also very sort of big uses of open data. You can look at mortality, you can look at infection rates, and in the UK it was found that when this data was published, all of a sudden mortality rates went down in hospitals because they looked at the data and they said, oh, we're not performing very well compared to some of the other hospitals, and they got their acts together. The other fun thing that I like about the UK health data was that it was found out that 27 men were pregnant in the UK. So it was one of my favorite stories, but what happens is errors also become more noticeable when open data happens. And so while some government officials might say, well, I don't want to publish my data because I don't know about data quality, it's actually better for there to be more eyes on your data because they'll point out the mistakes, and then you can fix them. So one of the other problems in the UK... Did you have the babies? The question was whether they had the babies, and I don't think they did. Another example of this is the UK as well. It's a fairly advanced open data initiative, so we've got a lot of examples from the UK. But the transport data for bus stops was published And when people mashed it up with a map, they used it to look at OpenStreetMap is an open source, crowdsourced mapping platform online. So when the bus stop data was mashed up with this open source map, people could see that some bus stops were in the middle of lakes, and some were on the wrong side of the street, and some were in the ocean. And so the bus stop data wasn't 100% accurate. And so the Department of Transportation said, great, help us fix it. And OpenStreetMap, which also has a very strong volunteer community, actually mobilized mobilized volunteers, and they submitted 18,000 corrections to the data. So now the bus stop data in the UK is accurate. So this stuff doesn't just happen outside of the Caribbean. We have here the budget data visualizations for the Jamaican budget from 2012-2013. You have an NGO that's based out of the Mona School of Business in Jamaica called the Caribbean Open Institute. That's your grassroots organization for open data from civil society. And it's led by a gentleman called Dr. Maurice McNaughton, who anyone who's interested in open data should definitely have a chat with him. So this shows, for example, that this part of the Jamaican budget data is debt payment. This really large part here is debt payment. So you see why the IMF has been in Jamaica recently. These are the guys who created this visualization. So you have young creative people sitting together using the open spending platform that exists as a platform. You feed budget data into it, and it helps you visualize the budget data. But essentially, these are sort of young, internet-savvy, computer-savvy people, and they can create these types of visualizations. CrimeBot is another example of a young company that could benefit from open data and right now is doing what it can without open data. But CrimeBot is an app that provides crime hotspot views and sends out alerts based on locations to mobile devices. So if you're walking along a street and there was a crime near you, it'll send you an alert to your mobile phone. And you can also, if you see something sketchy happening or something suspicious happening, you can also, it's crowdsourced. You can also enter, okay, on such and such a street, I think there was a mugging or there is a mugging going on right now. So citizens submit the information about suspicious activity in real time. It gets pushed to everybody else. And so CrimeBot can pinpoint areas of higher crime. It took 19 days from the development of the concept to a working prototype. So this is not rocket science. What they're doing right now is they're scraping the data from the website of the Jamaican Constabulary, the police force, and the media. So they're doing it the hard way. This is where the machine readability of open data would really be able to help them. So if the Jamaican Constabulary were able to make their data sets available in a machine readable format online, these guys would be able to get this data much more quickly into their app. So they're very much interested in that happening, and they're not the only ones. So there are lots of different niches, lots of different approaches to using the data. So very often what we find is if a data set is released, it can actually provide creative work opportunities for more than one company. These are Jermaine and Janice. What they've created is an online clearinghouse for agricultural products. So if you're a farmer, you can go onto this app and this website and say, I've got X amount of this type of crop and it'll be available at this time, or it's available now, who wants to buy it? And if you're a caterer or a restaurant owner or a hotel owner, you can go on this website and say, I would like to buy this and I'd like to do this. And then the website and agrotech gets a cut of the deal. One of the reasons I find this is really compelling is because I've observed that during mango season in the Caribbean, you'll find, the streets are full of mangoes underneath trees. Some of them are rotting, some are ripe and beautiful, but you just don't see a mango dish on a restaurant menu. You don't see a seasonal menu that has mango chicken or mango sorbet, or so there's a disconnect between the hospitality industry and the agriculture industry. And it would be really useful for this type of app to help. And this actually won a mobile innovation challenge competition in Jamaica. If you ask Janice and Jermaine, are you guys interested in open data? Their eyes light up and they say, absolutely. We want to have regional crop statistic. We'd like to have import price data for different crops so we can incorporate this. We'd like to have weather analytics and emergency advisories. We want to incorporate all of that into our app and increase the value of the app. This is Roxanne and her business partner. So you see we have examples of young people in their 20s in business. It's not just the domain of men, it's also the domain of women. What they have is an app that's called Mia Go, and it's an application for purchasing event tickets for cultural events and concerts. And when you ask the two of them, what kind of open data are you interested in? They say, oh, fantastic. We'll take the list of all of the event spaces in the country. We'll take a list of the certified event managers. We'd like to know the capacity level of different venues. We'd like to know when the cruise ships are coming in and how many people are on the cruise ship. So you see open data needs of a company also span different ministries. This is not just about one ministry's data. It's about the business needing data from a lot of different ministries in order to be able to improve their product. These guys were invited to present their product in Korea at one of the Mobile Innovation Challenges. So what do we have? We have a project that's a joint World Bank DFID 2-year grant that's been a $1 million project to undertake diagnostics in the Caribbean and provide technical assistance to implement some of the recommendations. So we've done these open data readiness assessments, and I'll tell you more about them in a moment. Some of them have had open budget deep dives, and they were completed in St. Lucia, Jamaica, and Antigua. We're collaborating, of course, with the CTU as well as with the Caribbean Open Institute. Okay, I'm going to have to rush, I think. We provided legislative review. We're working on policies and the licensing regime. There are 3 open data portals that will be established, including one that's regional. It closes in March of 2016, and we're actively looking for follow-up grants. The OJER methodology looks at these 8 pillars and then ascribes a number to them. So I'm going to skip through this a bit. Anyone who's interested in a diagnostic in their country, I'd be happy to discuss it with them. These are the findings from Antigua. Since I don't have a lot of time right now, I will just say that generally the findings are a clear political leader needs to be empowered on behalf of government in order to take forward open data. The political case needs to be developed and agreed by cabinet, and these are true also for the other countries where we've done the diagnostic. You need to have an open data policy, you need to work on this licensing that I was telling you about. And you identify the quick wins, you release the quick win data sets, and then you go ahead with other data sets later on. The Jamaica ODRA was done in December. These are all the ministries that we met with, plus others. This is actually just a selection of them. So we come for a full week and we meet with everybody and talk to them about the data sets that they've got. These are the quick win data sets identified in Jamaica. That means that these data sets are available in machine-readable format. What they're not is currently published in machine-readable format, and they don't have an open license. So these are the ones that can very easily go from 0 stars to 3 stars. They just need to be put online in a machine-readable format. Look at the first one, consumer prices. Just as part of our open data readiness assessment process, Jamaica was able to just publish the consumer price data, and part of it was the fuel price data. And someone already created an app that tells you where you can find the cheapest fuel on the island. So you can go into this app and say, I'm here, where is the cheapest fuel? It'll direct you to it. We've done some OpenStreetMap training, both in St. Lucia as well as in Jamaica, where private sector and public sector were trained in using this crowdsourced open source mapping tool with which you can mesh open government data and create visualized maps with the data. So this is the training room in St. Lucia. This is one of the people who was trained in St. Lucia and everything he's tagged since the training. So you see here, he actually drove around the island and started tagging things. So Whereas before in OpenStreetMap, there was nothing tagged there, now it's starting to happen. And so the idea is for governments to build a community of mappers around this and be able to map the island. This is one of the guys who has the machine-readable data on his network and his computer, and then you just need to go find it. We've also visited Ottawa for the 3rd International Open Data Conference, and you've got teams here from Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, and Jamaica. All right, open data portals in the single ICT space. What is the portal? Really, a portal is where you make available the open government data. So this is the Moldova portal. It has 732 data sets. 38 different institutions publish it within Moldova. Moldova is a small country, about 3 million people. The most active publishers are Ministry of Health and the Ministry of the Interior. There are different types of platforms that can be used. They have about 10,000 downloads a month. This is the Indian Open Data Portal, a little shy of 8,000 data sets, and you can create your own visualizations with your own data. This is the Canadian Open Data Portal, over 200,000 data sets, and you can search by different filters on the left-hand side, and then you basically get your data and you're good to go. What are we suggesting for the Caribbean? A hub and spokes model. So what we're purchasing under the grant that I told you about earlier is the country portal for St. Lucia, one country portal for Jamaica. There's a different team on in a different project purchasing one for Trinidad and Tobago. We're also purchasing a regional open data aggregator portal to be managed by a regional institution. ECCB and CDB have already told us that they'd like to put their data into the regional open data portal. So we already have regional institutions saying they'll put their data on it as well. What are regional standards for within the single ICT space? What does that mean for open data? So obviously harmonized open data policies. And I'll mention a little bit more on that in a moment. Interoperable open data portals. So the technical standards for the portals need to be such that the portals are interoperable. And since we're looking at bringing on board a regional portal, by definition, the regional portal pulls the data from the national portals. So it's interoperable. But any countries that subsequently come on board, the idea is for them to use the same standards and the same sort of technology so that they're interoperable and the portals can communicate to one another, and any new country's portal can also push its data to the regional portal. Harmonized metadata templates and files. So as part of the contract that we've got with the vendor that's going to give us the portals, we've asked them to produce for us harmonized metadata templates and files that other countries in the Caribbean can use as well. And harmonized data formats. So these are the things for open data that you'll need as part of the single ICT space. This is the section in the portal's terms of reference that we put in. The Caribbean region has an interest in adopting the same open data technical and data standards so that portals can be interoperable. So the consultant will provide data standards that are regionally interoperable, in short. So we wrote it into the terms of reference for the portals that are being brought online now. There's an open data charter that was just published on Sunday. The governments of Mexico, Canada, and a number of other governments, Italy, France, I think UK as well, got together and they decided to create an open data charter that functions similar to the WTO charter. So that means that countries that are interested in doing an open data initiative can sign on to the charter. I have copies of the charter here with me. I'd like to hand them out to some of you who are interested in it. And then the question becomes, does your country want to sign on to this charter? You will see over the next couple of years countries signing on to the charter. And countries will essentially say, this is what we agree to do by such and such a date. This is what we commit to. And they'll specify a roadmap of what they're committing to based on the principles that are set out in the charter. We've done a legislative review in Jamaica and in St. Lucia, and those are the different laws that we looked at. The results are that, according to international best practices, the trend is to implement open data legal issues through policies and regulations. So in the UK, for example, they stated that they didn't want to use legislation for open data, but there is clearly a need to clarify the law. So we found essentially that there are elements that need to be clarified, but they can be clarified with policies and regulations. and we provided recommendations for those. Countries may wish to modify their laws, and then they need somebody local to be able to do this. This is Minister Fletcher, one of his quotes on supporting open data initiative in St. Lucia. There was in 2013 an op-ed in the Antigua Observer that also said that it was an important plan to make information available to the public. The Jamaica Observer also had a number of supportive quotes on open data, so this is certainly very popular with the media. There are several indices that plot your success that you should be aware of. And that's it.
Thank you very much. You see there's a lot to discuss in open data, and a lot of good stuff is actually already happening in the Caribbean. We wanted to have enough time for some questions and answers so that we can get a sense of what kinds of issues may be inside of the implementation of open data initiatives in your territories, or if you had any questions concerning policy or practice as far as implementation is concerned. So let's open the floor for questions, comments, feedback on open data and the single ICT space.
Yes, thank you. My name is Hopeton Dunn from UWI Mona, Jamaica. Thank you for that presentation. I thought it very useful, very helpful. You made reference to a corporate entity like Monsanto buying up a lot of data from an originally open source availability. Does that mean that it ceases to become open data once it gets into that corporate network?
I'm sorry, that what? That it ceases to be open data? So Monsanto didn't buy the open data, it bought the firm that created value by creating a whole insurance business around open data. So no, I mean, the same data that the firm used, which ultimately was purchased by Monsanto, remains open data. That same data is still available on the website where the original guys got it from in 2006. So you can go ahead and you can take the same data set and figure out some other product to make with it.
Just following up on Dr. Dunn's question is, I think he's trying to establish a difference between proprietary data and open data. Because if the company buys the company, then it becomes it's owned by the company. So we're just trying to. No,
I mean, the bit of it that's proprietary is the data that's produced from the analysis, right? So the analysis that the company implemented on the data, that's their analysis, and that belongs to them. So they don't have any particular requirement to publish that. But the data itself is open data, and it doesn't belong to them, and anyone can use that same data set. But they wouldn't go to Monsanto for the data. They'd go right back to the government to get that same data set. So nobody needs to approach Monsanto for the data. What Monsanto purchased was the insurance business, and that belongs to them, of course.
Which sectors, in your experience so far, have contributed?
Name, please. Name and organization.
Ria Yoching, Covella Foundation. Which sectors have been early adopters, in your estimation, in providing open data, real time or not, that have resulted in new entrepreneurial activity and initiatives? Just to get a sense of where the action is actually happening and how beneficial those sectors are relative to us.
Great, thanks for that question. So the killer app is transport. Now, how relevant that is for a small island economy, I'm not sure. But what we see in a lot of other places that have train systems, they've got bus systems, they have flight systems, there's school buses, there's streetcars, there's all kinds of things, and you want to know when the next bus is coming, and you want to know when it's going to be at such and such a station. So everything related to opening up the transport lines, the routes, the schedules, putting GPSs on the buses so that they can communicate via satellite real time with the app. So that's been a killer app in countries and in cities where this kind of context exists. Now, I don't think that transport in the context of the Caribbean is going to be necessarily, maybe in some cases yes, but in most cases probably not, where there may not be an official bus system and it's really privatized little mini buses that are driving around and picking people up and etc. What I think will be more the priority sectors in the Caribbean is tourism and agriculture and open data for disaster response, disaster management. So I think those are some of the areas. But what we find is extremely valuable is to publish is weather data, because people will use weather data for a lot of different applications. Mapping, so cartography, getting the maps out in digital formats, because map is sort of an underlayer, a foundation that can be mashed up with any other data set to visualize it, as long as you have GPS coordinates. As well as, so weather mapping, I think there's something else that I'll come back to in a moment. But I think in the case of the Caribbean, certainly tourism data, because here you have both tourists arriving who would like to have services via mobile phones, and you have small businesses catering to tourists in the tourism industry. So you've got two sets of people who could really use that data and create new products and services around it. Hospital performance and school performance are the other two areas, more on the transparency and accountability side, that are very, very popular.
Yes. Just wanted to give another angle of sight onto that. The question is, what kind of areas are likely to be good starter areas for open data? I've done mobile application development workshops now in, I think it's over 8 Caribbean territories, and in every case, the issue of transportation and apps that deal with bus schedules, ferry schedules has come up as an important thing for citizens. Now, what this ties into, which is where the whole value proposition is what are the local applications that have an actual practical benefit to local customers that comes into play. So transportation, yes, but transportation that allows people to understand something that's very erratic right now in most territories. When is the bus coming? Is it actually coming? Which is then tied to the issue of, as you said, GPS trackers on the actual vehicles. Now, an interesting nuance to that in the Caribbean context is the request to have that same kind of tracking, not just for public transportation, but for what we call the maxi taxis or the ZRs or the minibuses as well, so that people can identify what is happening for transport generally. So it's not just a tourism application, it's a very practical and very important aspect of moving human resource in country. There's another area as well too that continues to come up as a recurring request inside of the application development workshops, and that is agriculture data. From several standpoints. One, when to plant, what are the threats facing crops, and of course the common and very popular one, what's the price, wholesale and retail, for produce. So you find a very similar mapping to what is taking place in other jurisdictions concerning which open data areas provide what level of value. And I think in further response to the question, Ria, the issue of who is interested in creating that value proposition on top of the open data becomes very important. But tied to that is which government agency is willing to start the opening up of the data. We had a case in Dominica where some young persons wanted to write agriculture-based applications, went to the Ministry of Agriculture and were told that they couldn't even get the hard copy without permission from the permanent secretary. Right? And that's a real-world example of excitement, enthusiasm, and zeal at the application developer level, knocking into the barrier of, well, our policies whether spoken or unspoken, say you can't get it unless you pass through these routes. And that's where the issue of leadership, I think, and championing open data from a very practical standpoint of improving service delivery becomes important. But the areas of interest are just the same as with any other territory in the world: transport, agriculture, health, security, and then tourism, almost as a also ran, because the first application are the applications that have the most local relevance.
So can you take a stab at that very question, but instead of using government or public sector data, answer it based on private sector data? In other words, which sectors are the early adopters in the private sector that have contributed most to opening up their data, that have spawned entrepreneurial activity? The number one most valuable resource in the private sector that everybody would love to use, you actually demonstrated in your presentation, and that's telecommunications mobile data.
Right.
Any other?
Private sector data is an issue because where it is data that they have collected themselves or they have created themselves, it's owned by them, and usually it's proprietary, and usually they don't want to share it because they don't have an incentive to share it. There is a movement of, and some of my colleagues at the World Bank are involved in it. There's a movement to try to see whether companies can be altruistic and open up data sets that can be part of a public good for answering sort of some of our sustainable development challenges, such as poverty or environmental and climate control, et cetera. But this is very much at the beginning stages. We don't have a private sector open data initiative, or that doesn't really exist at this stage, because why would companies really take this asset that they have and make it available free of charge? There are maybe some examples, maybe Bevel knows of a couple himself, but I don't know of very many. And we're really dealing primarily at this stage with opening government data, and there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of potential just looking at opening government data. I think telecom sector data, mobile phone usage data, it's a treasure trove. They were able to track, it needs to be very properly anonymized, so there's sort of a data privacy issue there that's really quite large. But they were able to figure out HIV infection rates based on the mobile phone data of truckers in Western Africa. So we're able to really track HIV infection rates based on the routes that truckers took. In the Ebola crisis, mobile phone data was also quite instructive in figuring out the Ebola outbreak and where it was going to go. So it really does help a lot, and maybe it's one of those things that governments can then write into their licensing agreements with telecom operators. But here, the anonymization bit is a very important one that needs to be tackled.
So the anonymization is important, yes. And in fact, if we just simply, not even rewrote our legislation, but we are in a telecommunications seminar conference right now, the heat maps that can be generated simply from mobile data can be instrumental in not even in entrepreneurial activity, but certainly being able to locate where you're putting fire stations, police stations, improving your roads just from heat maps, from where the traffic patterns of people exist at different times of the day. I think it would be so useful if we can align ourselves or work with the telecommunications partners to bring that data. It's of tremendous value.
Any other questions? Nigel? Then we'll take one more.
Yes, thank you. Nigel Casimir. We've heard, well, we know of the intention of a lot of the governments of the Caribbean to try to develop the ICT as an industry. And in fact, the CTU is working to also push that as an engine for innovation and that sort of thing. And, well, we haven't addressed this data issue too much prior to this, I would think. You know, there have been a couple of occasions, but really not really to the extent that I think we're doing now. And the question is really, could we achieve that goal at all of developing a indigenous ICT industry, and especially where local content is important, so things that have local value, right? Could we do that at all? Is it a realistic objective to have a local ICT as a local industry, you know, fueling growth of the economy and so on, without a basis without a base of open data? That's the question. Is there any way around this, and is this a given that governments must be taking action on?
So is the question, governments must open up their data in order to grow a local innovation sort of sector? Is that the question?
Yes, and especially here in the Caribbean, is there any way, and if not, is there any other way around it that we could possibly reach this government goal of developing ICT as an industry and a growth pole for the economies?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I see a lot of potential in this region. And I see a lot of very creative, very entrepreneurial young people who are internet savvy. If given the right skills, if those skills are provided as part of the educational system, there could really be a lot of potential in this region. And we see in the case of Jamaica that there already is a lot of potential. Most of the examples that I provided are from Jamaica, and there's an incubator there that helps young people prepare themselves for putting together these companies, these small companies. There's co-working spaces. We're working through CARSIP with St. Lucia as well as St. Vincent and Grenada to put together such incubator spaces as well. So I do think there's a tremendous amount of potential because there's smart people here and there's creative people here. It would help. It would certainly help to give them the raw inputs. You know, for agriculture, you need soil. For apps, you need data. You know, so yes, you can do it without that type of an input, but it would really help. It would, and why wouldn't you give your private sector that kind of help? You know, why wouldn't you give them that gold mine that Bevel was talking about to help them to create these products? So you could have a product that doesn't rely on data, but you know, I think the choices would be fewer, the solutions would be fewer. One of the other things I wanted to mention is that as part of the single ICT space, you should look at these young companies as regional products and regional resources. So when a company in Jamaica creates an app, well, maybe that app can also be used in Antigua, or it could also be used in St. Lucia. I mean, a young company that creates itself in these islands doesn't necessarily need to market its work just in one island. So that means that if a young entrepreneurial team in St. Lucia creates a mobile app, there should be ways in which the governments support and encourage them to export it regionally to other islands. There should be ways in which that's encouraged and facilitated so that something that happens in one island doesn't feel like it needs to stay in that island, and that these resources are available elsewhere as well. So I do think there's a lot of potential. I think that there are policies that governments need to implement in order to facilitate this. It starts with a review of education, which I'm sure is happening. You know, it starts at primary education. Children need to learn how to type. You know, children learn languages. Well, maybe a programming language should be one of the languages they learn. You know, maybe in addition to English, French, and whatnot, there should be some Python in there, no? So, so there are things that could happen. The government could have, you know, summer programs for on computer skills for secondary school children, or there could be summer programs for coding. So students would go in the summer to learn how to code. There's a lot of different things that governments can do, and there are policies that are best practice from other countries. You know, in some best practice countries, there are signs up in high schools. Do you have an idea? Do you want to create an app? The government will help you, will give you seed money. And the government has set aside funding to provide seed money for people who have an idea and would like to take it to market. And so there's an entire structure of support. So those are the types of things that you need to think about when you look at the innovation bit. I wanted to give you an example from another region with an app that is regionally relevant. Oh, sorry. Okay, all right, so I won't give you the example? Okay, all right.
But you can get the example at the break from
That's
Annette.
right. It's a break example.
All right, but Nigel, in short, and just to repeat, because I thought it was an excellent analogy, if the applications are the field of our digital economy and our digital dreams, then open data would be the soil. And so you asked the question if government should move toward open data, and the answer is an unequivocal yes, absolutely. It's imperative if you want to see the kinds of local content and local applications that the raw building blocks for it are made available to those who have the ability and talent to write the applications. That's a big yes. So I want to thank Annette for her presentation. Let's give her another round of applause. I thought that was excellent. And let me hand over to Mr. Trevor Pravat, who will take us on to our next session.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Trevor Pravat with the CTU. Yes, thank you, Annette. And I'd just like to make the point before handing over to VTC Secure that, if you think about what you were saying about that $1.1 billion company, that could have been created right here in the Caribbean. Right? We've been heard that the infrastructure is not the problem. It's just to get the people working on it. Definitely.
In small countries, the goal is to sell.
Right.
The goal is to create that company and to sell it. So.
Okay, good. Thank you again. Yes, the CTU, we believe in inclusiveness, and so we've been doing work over the last few years on trying to ensure that people with disabilities get more of our attention. So we've been running basically workshops for people with ICTs. We use facilitators who are deaf, who are blind, and who help us reach out to people with PWDs, with those sort of disabilities. So we had asked one of the facilitators to go to a seminar this run every year in Washington, D.C. That's the M-Enabling Summit, which you'll hear a little bit more about. And he made a connection with VTC Secure. I'm going to hand you straight over to Mr. Peter Hayes, or maybe Mr. Mike Trentadue, who are with VTC Secure, and they're going to take you through their presentation, which will talk about the VTC Secure, how they can help with accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, hi, Mike, we're not hearing you.
Hold on for 1 second. Can you guys hear us now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Is it clear? Okay. All right, well, let's try this again.
We got to get back on the main screen.
Hold on 1 second. We don't have you on screen
Yeah,
as
I'm
yet.
not coming back on the main screen yet, I don't think.
Yeah, just give us 1 minute.
No.
Oh, go ahead now, please.
Okay, is that better? Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Michael Trentadue. I'm the head of sales with VTC Secure. With me to my right, you can't see him yet, but it's Peter Hayes. There he is. So I want to thank you all very much for asking us to be part of the CTU's ICT Week. Special thanks to Mr. Ryan Gale, who's actually responsible for introducing us to the CTU. We initially met Ryan at the M-Enabling Summit in Washington, D.C. this June. And that show is put on by the Global Initiative for Inclusive Information and Communication Technologies, the G3 ICT and EJ Krauss and Associates. Basically, the show's whole goal is to promote mobile, accessible, and assistive applications and services for senior citizens and persons with disabilities. And basically, they focus on leveraging the latest operating systems, technology, handsets, tablets, any of that technology, which would better improve the lives of individuals. I'm going to talk a little bit about our company and some of the things we have going on, so you get a little bit of an idea of what we do. And then I'm going to pass you over to Peter, who's going to get in depth on the solutions and some of the things that we have that may be of use to the islands. So VTC Secure, we're a global software company. We specialize in live, on-demand, real-time video, voice, and text communication solutions for the disabilities communities, for the deaf, blind, and the blind. We also provide solutions for emergency management, first responders, customer service, telemedicine, tourism, and for governments. We've assembled a team comprising of the best video experts in the field, most of which have experience working with some of the national providers of VRS in the US. Currently, we have projects, like I mentioned, going on. We have a project with the FCC that is basically aimed to standardize video relay service in the US, fixing some of the interoperability issues and promote technical innovation. We've built an open source app to do that. We also have projects going on directly with the White House and all of the government agencies to ensure that accessible communications are available. And we're working with some of the largest cities in the US. One example is New York City. We're helping them provide accessible communications for all of the city government organizations. Internationally, we're working with the UN and with the ITU on a number of projects on a global scale and ways to integrate technology across the board. We've also partnered with some of the best and brightest deaf universities to really help us get involved with the community so we're better able to provide solutions that actually meet their needs. We also are working with the National Federation of the Blind in the US, and they helped us complete a 50-person national pilot testing new technology and a new service that we've created called Visual Remote Access. It enables us to provide a secure remote agent who can actually assist them through the view of their camera or smartphone or tablet. We've also partnered with some of the best technology companies in the US and in the world just to do exactly what we want. We want to promote equal and effective communication for all. So I think that should give you guys a good idea, and you ladies a good idea about what our company is all about. I'm going to pass this to Peter Hayes. He's our CEO and founder, and he's going to talk a little bit more about our technology specifically.
Hello, everyone. Is everybody able to hear me okay and still working well? I guess are you guys still able to hear me okay? I'm going to go ahead and, I guess, keep going. Yes, okay. So first, I want to thank you guys for having us here today. This is very exciting. And when we met, I was excited to hear that the Caribbean was really looking to include people with disabilities in its future outlook and its communication. So it's an honor to be here today. I first want to talk a little bit about what we're doing for the FCC, because sort of listening to a lot of what I've heard being talked about, I think what we're doing with the FCC is very important and could be very valuable to the CTU and its members. So, and just to give you an idea, I was at the ITU 2 weeks ago in Geneva giving this speech sort of to the whole world, and a lot of people got very excited about this. So we, in the United States, the deaf and hard of hearing are able to use a service called Video Relay Service. I'm going to explain what that is in a little bit and actually do a demonstration of it. It allows the deaf person to make a telephone call through a sign language interpreter. This service is paid for in the United States by the federal government, but there was a big issue is several different providers created different kinds of software, and they didn't operate well with each other. This software requires real-time text and voice and video. So the FCC put out a bid, and we won this bid to create an open source voice, video, and text application. Now, this is to be used as a standard for the VRS industry, but essentially what we're building is we are building an open source version of Skype. So if you took Skype, which is owned by Microsoft and proprietary, we're creating a non-proprietary open source version. that anybody can download and anybody can use for free. So different countries, different companies can take this technology, put their own user interface on it, brand it, and use it for whatever they want. And again, I'll talk a little bit later about all the other things that it's starting to be used for. One of the huge advantages of this also is all of it is built off of ITU standards. So we're not using any proprietary call setup or video or audio. So it's something that's very documented that everybody can sort of learn how to do. And if I forget to mention it later, starting in the spring semester, VTC Secure will be holding a global contest for universities all over the world with significant prize money to be able to submit different interfaces and different features for the app that can be put into the open source community and used by everybody. So real quick, first I'll explain what VRS is and why it's so important, and it's made so important in the United States and made strides and is really important for any country. So VRS stands for Video Relay Service. Video Relay Service allows a deaf person to take a smartphone or a video phone of any kind, put in a telephone number, and it will launch a video call to a sign language interpreter. That sign language interpreter will show up on video and then call the person remotely over the telephone. And anything that the deaf person signs to the interpreter will then speak to the hearing person. Anything the hearing person speaks to the interpreter will sign to the deaf person. So it allows for real-time communication for the deaf and hard of hearing over the telephone network. So I'm going to show this and then demonstrate or talk about all of the reasons why this is so important. So I sent an email earlier to my sister. I have to give a big presentation at the FCC next week, and I'm going to be in town. My sister lives in the DC area. So I'm going to call her, and I texted her and told her to be sure to answer. And I'm going to call her through VRS. So I just dialed her phone number. Hold on 1 second. So now I have an interpreter on the screen. Hello, we're doing a demo. Okay. And one thing about video is it always requires a good network connection, and we're using a lot of it now for the interpreter. So if you can make the call, if you want to drop off one. We've got too many video calls going at once. Can you pause yours for a second?
Because then they can't see me.
Hold on 1 second, we'll call. We're actually going to go ahead and use the cellular network. We've got so many video feeds into the call right now that I'm going to use cellular, which this technology works very well on. So let's see if I can show you. And this is the dangers of doing live demonstrations. But this technology is used all the time and works. Okay, hold it still.
be wonderful. The kids would love to see you. Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you, Connie. I'll talk to you later. Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Okay, so as you can see there, I was just able to call my sister and communicate with her using my native language with a sign language interpreter, and this is key for so many reasons. So it allows a deaf person to use a telephone. It allows for the deaf to call each other point to point directly using telephone numbers, so they can communicate very easily over the same phone numbering system that all of us use in the hearing world. It also allows for a person who is deaf to work at a job and do better at their job. They can communicate with people. One of the first times I set this up for a woman who worked at a government agency, as soon as I got the video working, I called her and she started crying. And I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she said, I'm so happy because I've worked at this government agency for 30 years and I've never been able to communicate with people outside of the office, to be able to make a phone call. I couldn't call my daughter's principal back. And when they finally got this technology, they were so happy and excited, and it really made a difference in their lives, and it allowed them to do their job much better. This technology and the app that we're coming out with will also be used, as Mike mentioned, for government agencies. So now you can hire a deaf or hard of hearing person to take calls from other deaf and hard of hearing individuals. So in a lot of cases, you might press 1 for Spanish, 2 for English, 3 for French when you call into a call center. Well, this allows you to set up a call center where a deaf user can answer the call. So this creates more jobs for the deaf and hard of hearing. It can also be used for vocational rehab and training, so the deaf and hard of hearing can get training to be able to do more jobs and do them more effectively. So our goal with this technology is to get the entire world to use it. And knowing that we were going to be putting out this open source application, several years ago, we began to build a platform. And what we've built is an advanced platform called Solves, Secure On-Demand Live Video Enablement Solution. This platform does everything that a carrier network does. It allows you to register an iPhone, an Android phone, PC, Mac, any software or video phone. It can also work in a web browser, allows you to register to a service and make calls to each other with voice, video, or real-time text, or all at the same time. Now, the big thing that we added was today, a lot of us use video to call each other. You'll call one-to-one. Or in an example like this, a lot of people will call into a room to have a big meeting so that they can all collaborate. What we've done with our platform is built it as a call center as well. So it can do point-to-point, it can do many people, but what we've done is built a call center application that allows you to create queues so you can set up services via video, on-demand services for the next person that calls in for any type of service. So what we do for VRS is there's a group of sign language interpreters sitting there waiting to take the next available call. And when they receive that call, they're able to make a telephone call for someone. This platform has everything that you would need for a call center. It has web interfaces that are completely customizable. There's administration interfaces where you can set up agents, set up users, set up queues. There's an agent interface that allows an agent to be anywhere using a web browser to take calls from anyone that calls in over video. It has real-time reporting and historical reporting that allows you to see what's going on live in the platform, how many people are in queue, how many agents are waiting to take the next call. It can also do historical reporting, so you know who's calling in and when they're calling in. So one of the most important things, this can be used for, especially for the deaf, is also emergencies, so that they can call 911 in the United States and call emergency services. Now, as we built this and started to distribute this software, we quickly found that people wanted to use it for other applications, not just for VRS. So this type of service, which video call center services are not very common. There's very few, if any, out there. And the deaf and hard of hearing have been using VRS in the United States for close to 10 years. And, there's hundreds of thousands to millions of users calling thousands of interpreters. So as soon as we started to set this up, people said, wow, what else can we use this for? And that's where we came up with the concept for the blind, which is basically, we took the same app, changed the interface so that it would work using what's called voiceover, and would allow a person to navigate the phone without having to look at it, be able to press a button, call an agent. Where did the dog make a mess on the floor? How do I get out of this building that's on fire? So the platform quickly began to expand, and now people are going, wow, if you can do video call center services, you can do emergencies. Imagine in hurricanes or other situations where people need to communicate what's happening, and you can put eyes on a situation. It can be used for healthcare. We've already connected to one of the largest language companies in the world, and you can now get interpreters in over 30 languages via video, which is very important. And I shared this story at the UN as well. I had been working with a group of doctors who, when I showed what we were doing with VRS, they said, we want this for all languages. And I said, well, it's much easier to use the telephone. You should just use the telephone for interpreting language. And they said, no, we want video, and I'll tell you why. Often a doctor will tell a patient, you need to take this drug twice a day for the next 2 weeks. And they hear the interpreter interpret that call or translate that call or that statement. They then look at the patient, and the patient has a confused look on their face. And this is something that the translator doesn't see if you're on audio. And often the doctors felt that patients were leaving and they didn't have a good understanding of what they needed to do. And by the translator being able to see the patient, they can go, oh, you didn't understand that. Let me say it again, or let me use a different dialect. And they found that communication was much more effective because, as everybody knows, we don't just communicate with our voices. We communicate with our whole bodies and mostly with our faces. So again, this technology is quickly expanding, and it's even starting to be used for things. It could be used for tourism, for people able to call in and, hey, look around and look what's going on. It could be used for schools and education when people are at certain points in a lesson plan online and they need help. They could click a link, it would instantly open a video window, call into a queue full of teachers' assistants or other people that might be logged in that can help them with that particular information. So this is something we would love to do and work with the CTU to set up in the Caribbean. We could probably set it up in one location, and it could be accessed by most of the islands and most of the different nations. Again, I think the important thing here is VTC Secure works hand in hand with organizations and governments to get these types of things set up. And, technology is really only half of the solution. The other half of the solution is everything else, which can sometimes be even more important. For example, if you're going to institute VRS, you need to hire interpreters, you need to train them. You need to set up agent stations where there's good lighting and good internet connectivity. You need to be able to schedule them, know when to schedule and how to schedule them. You need to be able to inform the community that how to download the application, how to sign up, how to get connected. So, how to look at reporting, how to make sure that people aren't using it for fraud, different laws that would protect the interpreters in certain situations. So these are all things that we specialize in and things that we can work with organizations or countries to be able to institute this type of platform. So as far as cost and things like that, it's very dependent on what you want to do with the platform. But we've tried to simplify that and make it relatively easy in the sense that there's an initial significant setup cost. We have to procure servers and do all of the setup, but then we really just charge per simultaneous interaction that can occur on the platform, which makes cost and billing and those types of things very simple as far as the technology. So we'd be happy to work with anybody that's interested in doing this. We can help you work with it. And we find that as people are instituting these platforms, you know, there's a lot of innovation that comes out of it, a lot of new ideas, a lot of new services, a lot of new jobs it creates. And most important, it allows people with disabilities, whether it's, you know, sight, low vision, blindness, deafness, hard of hearing. We even are working on an add-on to our app that does output to a Braille reader writer, so that a person who is deaf and blind can press the button on a smartphone, get an agent who becomes their eyes, their ears, and their voice for them, and communicates back and forth through the agent through a Braille reader writer that they're holding in their hand. So we see a lot of advantages here, a lot of areas this can grow. So again, thank you guys for having us, and we'd love to answer questions. I know this is kind of a lot. What we try to do is make technology simple. It's not, but we do a pretty good job of trying to make it simple. So be happy to answer questions. And again, thank you for having us.
Any questions? Yeah, Peter, I wanted you to do I sent you a chat. I wanted you to do a little experiment with the audience here to let them understand what people with disabilities go through every day. I'm not sure if I was clear in the chat, but have a quick look at it and let's do it if you understand what I'm asking you to do.
Okay. As you can see, what just happened is what a deaf person experiences every day, which is the ability to not hear what's going on and not understand what's happening. And that just happened. And a funny story, I think, to get the point across even better, Trevor. I started working with the deaf and hard of hearing about 10 years ago. When I started the job, I was building the network for a deaf company, a huge video VRS system. I came in to manage a group of people, and I was the only hearing person, and I didn't know any sign language. And the entire group all day told their jokes, and they laughed in sign language, and they had a great time, and I had no idea what was going on. And anytime I wanted to interact with someone, I had to grab an interpreter. And I had, you know, it was extremely frustrating. And as I began to learn sign language, and I picked it up in 6 months, because, you know, I have the ability to sign, and because I was immersed in it every day, I had to do it, and I was able to learn quickly. But during some of those exercises of learning sign, we would actually go out to dinner and put on full-blown noise-blocking headphones and interacted with waiters and waitresses and you know what to do when somebody bumps into you and they don't realize that you know you can't speak or you couldn't hear their direction. And it's a very amazing thing, and I think it made me really realize how much I take for granted in my ability to communicate. And it's really why I continue to do this work and love to do it every day. And something that might sound a little bit harsh, but I use a lot of times when talking about this. God willing, every single one of you at one point in your life, if you live long enough, you will lose one of your forms of communication, whether it be sight or sound or movement. This is something, again, if you live long enough, you will experience. So it's important to include it. And my other favorite thing that I love the most, one of my favorite sayings, necessity is the mother of all invention. And as we go and solve these problems for the disabilities community, for direct purposes, we always find that the technology is able to be applied somewhere else outside of disabilities that nobody ever would have thought of if we hadn't been focusing on solving a problem for people with disabilities. And why I will never go back to being just a regular technology company. We will always focus on bettering communication and new devices and communication methods for people with disabilities.
For Peter and his team. And just remember that all of us will become disabled. None of us are disabled in this room at the moment, but we all will. Just look at your parents, and you're seeing where you're going. No, that's... They don't ask questions. Any questions? Okay, it's Peter, we don't have any questions for you. What I did want to point out, though, if you can put Peter back up on the screen.
If I talk, will it put me up there?
Right, yeah. Peter, what I'm just pointing out to them. So this is Peter Hayes, Mike Trentadue here. And this is one of their sign people. We have about 6 people who have come on virtually into the meeting, and she is communicating with them. They don't understand a word of what he's saying, so VTC kindly provided this person so that they're hearing what you hear. So this is how they hear. And I think we all need to understand that people with disabilities, they didn't become disabled by choice, and they all have a right to live as full a life as we all do now. So, okay, thank you very much. Peter, Mike, thank you very much. All of the participants in the audience, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Okay, we're right back on schedule now at 3:15. We're scheduled for a coffee break, and that's the end at 3:30 sharp. So if you want to get out of here at the closing time sharp, let's be back in the room and seated for 3:30. Thanks very much.